Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on the top political stories of the day. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. 11 gubernatorial offices are on the ballot in 2024. Delaware, Indiana, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Utah, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia. The outcome for many of these states seems to be solidly projected for one party or another, but several are promising to have competitive primaries and general elections. Here to help us take a look ahead is Ballotpedia staff writer Joel Williams. Welcome back to the show, Joel.
Thanks. I'm enjoying the perfect Chicago weather for spring, where it was 75 yesterday, tornadoes overnight, and some snow flares this morning. So we're getting it all in.
Oh, wow. We could have had the same here in Dallas. We had 90 degrees Monday, Tuesday. And then today woke up and it was 40. So the weather can't decide if it wants it to be spring or not.
Oh, yeah.
So to start, let's get a lay of the land. How many governorships does each party currently hold right now?
Yeah, so right now across the country, there are 27 Republican governors and 23 Democratic ones. And then for the 11 states holding elections this year, there's 8 Republican governors and 3 Democratic governors.
And can you give us a bird's eye view of how competitive these 11 races are projected to be?
Yeah, so to do that, we'll look at 3 factors. So the first one is how are other outlets rating the race? So for this in particular, we use 3 outlets: the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, Sabato's Crystal Ball, and Inside Elections. And I'm sure if you've listened to this podcast before, you might have heard some of those folks on the show. So in 9 of those 11 races, at least 2 of those 3 rate it as either safe or solid for one particular party. And then in New Hampshire and North Carolina, those are both rated as either toss-up or in some cases lean, which is like the first one in towards a party. So those are usually how we mark it as competitive. The second factor we look at are the results of the last presidential election in that state and whether those line up with who the current governor is. So like if there's a Republican governor in the state, but Joe Biden won it in 2020, we flag that as like another factor marking it as a competitive. And so New Hampshire and Vermont are both states where they currently have Republican governors, but Joe Biden won their electoral votes in 2020. And then North Carolina is the opposite. So they've got a Democratic governor, and then Donald Trump won the state in 2020. And then the third factor that we consider is whether or not the incumbent's running for re-election. So typically, if an incumbent's running, it'll trend to be less competitive generally in at least the general election. And so right now, there's 8 states where incumbents are not running for re-election. So the 2 cases where they are is Montana and Utah. And then a third one is Vermont, where Phil Scott just hasn't said anything yet about whether he's going to run again.
We're recording this interview on Wednesday, February 28th. So by the time listeners are hearing this episode, the Republican nominee for the governorship of North Carolina should already be decided. Only 2 of the last 5 of North Carolina's governors have been Republicans, Pat McCrory and James G. Martin. That might sound like a pretty even playing field between Democrats and Republicans, but if you zoom out, that's far more balanced than the state is used to when it comes to which party's occupying the governor's mansion. So North Carolina's only had 3 Republican governors since 1901. So needless to say, the state's Republican Party sees 2024 as a great opportunity to build on their recent success, with incumbent Roy Cooper, who's a Democrat, being term limited and the race being wide open. So Joel, is North Carolina ready to turn its attention to the general election, and who has each party rallied behind?
Yeah, so if you're an attentive listener, you may have noticed that when I listed the 3 criteria in my answer to the last question, North Carolina fit all of them. So it's definitely one of the races we've pegged as competitive and that we're going to be covering in greater detail on Ballotpedia. It's got a retiring Democratic governor who, as you mentioned, was term limited. It's rated a toss-up, and Donald Trump won the state in the 2020 presidential election. At this point that we're recording, we don't know who the party nominees are, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview. On the Republican side, in polling, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson has been the clear frontrunner. He is running alongside State Treasurer Dale Folwell and Attorney Bill Graham. And the other 2 candidates have both polled in like the upper single to lower double digits side of things. And Robinson has been like 30 to 40% pretty consistently. And then on the Democratic side, we've got Attorney General Josh Stein. He's pretty consistently been the clear frontrunner. He's in like the 40 to 60 point range. And then there's no other candidate that's been polling in even the double digits. So if we're going just by chalk with the polling, it'll probably be Mark Robinson and Josh Stein in the general election. But obviously, anything can happen.
So let's turn our attention to the Northeast in New Hampshire. Republican Governor Kristen Sununu has chosen not to seek re-election and is hoping another Republican will follow in his footsteps. But all 3 of the race rating publications you mentioned earlier have this one as a toss-up. meaning it could go for either party. So what's the race to replace Sununu look like in New Hampshire, Joel?
Yes, so I will preface this by saying the filing deadline isn't until mid-June, so there's still like 4 months left for people to jump in. So on the Republican side right now, it's Kelly Ayotte and Chuck Morse. And Ayotte is previously a U.S. senator from the state, and she was also the state's attorney general before that. And then Morse served in the state senate for 14 years, and he was the Senate president for 10 of those. And fun fact about him, he's already technically been governor. He got to serve as acting governor for 2 days in 2007 between when the then governor resigned to join the U.S. Senate, and then the new governor-elect got sworn in. And then the Democratic primary has 3 declared candidates right now. So there's former Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig, former Newmarket Town Councilor John Kuiper, and then State Executive Council member Cindy Warmington.
Got it. Well, 7 of the other states holding gubernatorial elections that are currently controlled by Republicans are expected to remain under Republican control, while the 2 other under Democratic control are also expected to stay that way after November. If they won't be all that competitive, is there anything else in particular that we're looking out for among this batch of elections?
Yeah, so one other thing to look out for that could make another really competitive general election is whatever Phil Scott chooses to do in Vermont. So if he decides not to run, that would also kind of open the field up there to see who wants to run to replace him, because that's a state that voted for Biden in the last presidential election. And going back to the 60s, their last 10 governors have neatly alternated parties. So that's not to say that the next one would have to be a Democrat, but that's just kind of like historical trend there. And then we've got 2 August primaries in other states that are marked safe. So we've got the Missouri gubernatorial primary should be really competitive. And then also the Washington, they have like a top 2 primary system. So that one's should also be pretty competitive as well.
Well, we have to have you back later in the year to go over those primaries. That's all the questions I have for you. So thanks for coming on the show and breaking down these gubernatorial races.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about our gubernatorial coverage at the link in our show notes. Make sure you're subscribed to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.